Mike Lyons, how are you today, sir?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Everyone, Mike Lyons is a Canadian that's living, I believe, in Gifu.
Yeah.
Been here a little while, haven't you? You've been like over a decade, right?
Over 3 decades.
Over 3 decades. So you're beating me then. Okay, fantastic. And I met Mike and came to know about his passion for souls back at OTJSS 20, actually.
Yeah.
When you first started talking about that, wasn't it in Simon Morin's session on education?
Yeah. That session was, what was it called? Destroying Education.
Destroying Education, yeah. And I thought, that's a really catchy title. And I could understand why you were there, but the more I learned about souls, by the way, the acronym stands for?
Self-organized learning environments.
The more I learned about it, I thought, yeah, that's a catchy way to make a title, but there's so much more to it. And it's so much more interesting. And I wanted to bring you onto the show so that you could explain it, because I think it's a really worthwhile idea. Want to start with a quick history? Like, what do you think we should know about it up to this point, so then we can start discussing it in depth?
Okay. So it hasn't been around very long. That's not fair. Souls have been around as long as humans have been around, but the process was really kind of discovered by an Indian scientist named Sugata Mitra in around 1998 or 1999. And I'll just share a little photo of what he did. Just a moment, please.
Take your time, sir.
Share screens. Okay, so this is a photo of Sugata Mitra.
Mm-hmm.
And behind him, you can see a bunch of kids fooling around with some computers that Sugata Mitra embedded in walls in the slums of Delhi in around 1998 or 1999. He, at the time, he was a computer scientist working in India's new Silicon Valley. And he had a nice, shiny, air-conditioned office building and high-speed internet and everything. But outside, it was slums. And he just decided to see what would happen if he gave kids computers to play with. And these kids had never seen computers before. They'd never heard of the internet. Most of them could not speak English and or just rudimentary local English. And many of them did not go to school and could not read or write. But they all wanted to play with these fancy new machines. So they all did that. They all played. And when they found out that something worked, they would tell each other, hey, if you do this with the mouse type thing, and if you click on this little picture, something happens. And the others go, oh, really? And they worked as a little community of practice. And what happened was, over a very short time, these kids with no English ability and no idea about computers became computer literate. And Sugata Mitra, who was, not an educator, he was a scientist, he recognized that what he was witnessing was a self-organizing process, self-organizing phenomena. And yeah, he called it, this was the hole in the wall experiment.
Mm-hmm.
From that, he defined what he was seeing as self-organized learning. And from there, he started to publish what he had witnessed, and it became a little bit of a movement in India, and then it spread to other countries. Sugata Mitra was offered a position at Newcastle University in the UK. He won the 2013 TED Prize for his research, and became a very, very famous man. And his experiments have been developed and repeated again and again around the world. yeah, that's the background.
He then went from India and started teaching, or was he always teaching in England?
No, he was a computer scientist before, and then, you know, his work was clearly of great relevance to education. So he was offered a job in the Faculty of Education at Newcastle University.
Okay, so that was after the hole in the wall experiment.
Yeah.
And did he actually incorporate souls into his university classes, or what did he do to actually promote souls after he got his teaching post?
Well, after he got the TED Prize, he was, well, before the TED Prize, actually, once he became fairly well known from previous TED Talks, before winning the TED Prize, he had done a couple of TED Talks already, and he was well known. And he was getting some kind of following. And a lot of teachers in the UK wanted to do what he was doing. So he started teacher training, I guess, and developing new strategies to do souls in schools in the UK.
When did you first start hearing about them?
I guess I first learned about him around 2010 or 2011. At the time, my son was in Japanese elementary school, and I had a lot of trepidation about my son's education in Japan and how teacher-centered it was. And I was looking for something that was more student-centered, something more free that my son could do. And I naturally fell in love with self-organized learning environments.
And then what did you do from there? Did you think, okay, well, let me read up on it? Or did you just jump whole hog into it and just start doing it? You own your own school, yes?
Yeah, I run my own school. So I was so keen on self-organized learning environments around 2010, 2011, 2012. And then Sugata Mitra won the TED Prize in 2013. And I was really going, wow, this is great. But I didn't do it myself. I mean, it just seemed like a huge jump from what I had been doing. Then around 2015, one day at my university campus, I was teaching at Meizhou University part-time. The computer room was just open one day, and there was no one in the computer room. So I asked the office staff, hey, would it be okay if I took my English class into the computer room and did this kind of lesson that I'd heard about called self-organized learning? And the staff said, yeah, go for it. See what happens. So I did. And after that, I mean, there was no turning back, because the success of that class was just remarkable. Up until then, my students were sort of typical Japanese first-year university students who would go to English class and enjoy the English lesson to a certain degree. And then they would, once the time was up, they would go off to their next class, ho-hum. But that soul was different. I was not able to get them out of the classroom. I mean, the lesson finished. I said, go on, it's time, go out, please. It's lunchtime.
Get out, get out.
The last group left the room 40 minutes after the period had finished. They did not want to finish. And that was kind of an eye-opener. And
I assume they weren't just, screwing around and like eating lunch. They were actually pursuing what they continued to pursue what they had been assigned, or what they had been pursuing already.
Yeah, I believe that they were inspired a little bit by the self-organized learning, but it's not just that. These are kids who had almost no experience of student-centered education at that, to that degree, and student-centered and communities of practice and all these keywords that we love and we all support. They're all there at the same time in a soul session. And I think the students just loved it for that.
Tell me about those students. Let's see, the university, right? And what was their general level? If you could give me a Cepher number or a TOEIC number.
They were TOEIC 400 or 450.
So pretty average sort of students. Second year, first year?
First year.
English department, or this was a mandatory class that
Well,
most
yeah,
kids?
I'm an English teacher, so it's mandatory English, but the faculty was not a language faculty.
So these are not necessarily keeners. They're
No.
not necessarily goofy and maybe, you know, totally hate English or anything like that. But these are fairly average sort of students.
Yeah.
And you basically let them do all of this without any instructions, without any policing for English usage or anything like that at all, right?
Oh, that very first class, what I did was, well, they came in, they went, "Why are we in the computer room today?" I said, "Well, today we're going to do something a little bit, well, not a little, but we're going to do something very different." And you can think of it as an English presentation class, if you like. Oh, we've done those before. This one's a bit different from other English presentation classes. You're going to be in groups. I'm going to give you a choice of topics that you can choose. Each of the topics is very difficult. It's not at university first year level. These topics are maybe 3 or 4 years beyond your level right now. And you're just going to have to deal with the difficulty of the topics, working together in groups and try to solve them. So some of the topics at the time, it's a long time ago, I don't actually remember all of them.
Mm-hmm.
One was, what are the white spots on Ceres? If you don't know, Ceres is an asteroid somewhere revolving somewhere between here and Jupiter, and
Right.
there's white spots on it. Now scientists know those spots to be ice, but in 2015, nobody knew what they were. And there was a lot of conjecture what the white spots are. And I told the students, you know, what are the white spots in Ceres? Teacher, what? What Ceres?
What series?
I'm not going to help you. Go look it up yourself. That's what the internet's for. That's why we're in the computer room. Look it up, find out, tell your friends. And so they did. And they worked together as a community of practice. They found out a whole lot of research about what the white spots in Ceres are. And they put that research into a presentation, which, given that they had just 90 minutes, a little bit less than 90 minutes with the introduction time, I'd say was way, way beyond Japanese university first year level. This is getting on to master's level in a native language, native speakers first level. Native speakers master's level.
Master's level. I want to pursue that topic, but before we do, welcome to everyone who came in. I was waiting for a few more people to join the group. You're quite welcome to, as Emil and Rhea have done, and Glenn, to turn on your cameras and say hello. However, I have limited people's abilities to unmute themselves unless there's a specific question that they want to ask, and they mentioned that to me in the chat. Because I wanted to go through, I wanted to give Mike the chance to actually focus on what it was that he wanted to deliver before we get into the more conversational part of the episode. There are also people in Facebook, and you know the drill. The comment thread is there for you, and I will be delivering to Mike whatever comments that you make in the Facebook thread, especially comments and questions, and the same for any comments and questions in the Zoom room. I have posted the Zoom information in the Facebook thread. If you'd care to join us, we'd be more than happy to actually have you here. So if you were asked, Mike, okay, in terms of like current sort of common known ideas about, you know, pedagogical methods, where would you put this closest to in terms of what's easiest for somebody to sort of grab onto and say, oh, that's what it's like? Is it task-based learning? Is it project-based learning? Is it, how would you describe it in an elevator pitch to someone that you just met, what a soul is?
Well, to my fellow teachers, I'd say it's a form of task-based learning, relying heavily on connectivism. All of us are connected, and all the information that we have is as a communal library is available to be used. Most of everything is on the internet. Everything is on the internet, pretty much. So it's just a matter of finding it and using it.
So you would, in terms of requirements, you would need a physical classroom or an internet connection, or can this be done let's say, at junior high school where there isn't necessarily an internet connection for students to be able to pursue or to use to pursue the tasks that you give them?
That's
What's
a really
necessary?
interesting question. Really interesting question. Let me sort of answer that through Sugata Mitra, because I asked that question to Sugata Mitra in an interview I did with him about 2 months ago. I mean, what if there is no internet connection? What if the students can't read? How then do you do a SOL? And Sugata Mitra said that he had attended an experiment in the USA with preschoolers, kids who couldn't read yet and couldn't use the internet yet. And he said that they had somehow managed to prove self-organization works among preschoolers too. Where is the connectivism? I don't know, but it's there. I don't really understand, small children's educational systems all that well, but connectivism is there at all ages.
What do you know about? I don't know. I mean, that's why I asked you onto the show. In terms of a student being put through a system like this, I can't even think of anything that's similar to it. I think there's a German methodology. I forget the name of it, but Montessori is kind of close. There's a lot of freedom in a Montessori class to pursue whatever the student is interested in with very minimal guidance from the teachers. But what do you know about any student that's gone through primarily SOLs as their primary learning environment, or is a SOLs or a student going through a SOL class that's something more like a little bit of spice to a normal curriculum? Or do you know about any students that actually went through an entirely SOL curriculum to study math, to study history, to study languages? What were their learning outcomes in that case if they were given a lot of SOL exposure?
There's only one school in the world that purports to do that. It's in India. It's called the Paradise School, Goa. It's a pretty famous school. And I believe, from what I've heard, that it's a very well-respected school in the city of Goa, India. But I have heard from the principal there that a lot of the teachers just don't do SOLs. You can imagine that a lot of the teachers that they hire might not be that into it because those teachers don't have any direct experience of doing SOLs themselves when they were coming up through their own education, their own teacher training. So, SOLs sort of they require a commitment from the teacher,
right,
to be less than a teacher. It requires the teacher to say, all right, I'm not going to teach these students, I'm going to facilitate, they're going to teach themselves. And it's not that easy to do.
Got a couple of comments, both from the Zoom room and from the Facebook chat. So I'll go to the Facebook one first. Namiko Tsuruta writes, "Hi, Mike. I joined a Japanese SOL session with teachers, and it was so fun and insightful. I wish all teachers at schools could experience this firsthand to understand the joy of inquiry-based learning." And we had a couple of questions, a couple of comments in the Zoom room. And oh, by the way, I do know that Montessori is Italian, and I was mentioning the German method only because I was trying to remember the name of this German method, and I couldn't remember it, and then Montessori popped into my head, so I'm sorry if I confuse anyone. Let's see. Glenn asks, okay, Mike, did you give the students any tips or guidelines to make their presentations, or was that, or what, or, okay, I think I'm paraphrasing, was that also a SOL-based process of learning? So I'll let you answer that one first, maybe.
No, it's a very good question, Glenn, and it's something that I couldn't really answer in a less than a minute. I think it'll take a bit longer. But anyway,
we can put it to after if you want, or you can answer it anytime you want.
I'll try.
Okay.
Since I'm an English teacher in Japan and I'm employed to teach English, and I want to do souls, then I have to cheat the system a bit. I do souls when I do souls when I'm not employed to do souls. I'm employed to teach English, so I cheat the system. I teach English presentation lessons, and the content of my English presentation lessons is souls. The veneer on top of it is an English presentation lesson. So yeah, I do teach some English presentation skills. And when they're doing their presentations, I give feedback on their grammar or their pronunciation. And prior to the presentation, I coach them on pronunciation and rhythm, etc. But the souls themselves, no touch. I don't give them any hints at all. Presentations, yes. The content, no.
Do you feel that their learning outcome is improved by your using souls as the vehicle of I don't want to say instruction, vehicle of learning, by being hands off through most of the process, and then giving your assessment and then giving your hints about grammar or whatever else, that they got just as good an education in English, which is what they were supposed to be getting the credit in, as they would have in any other way?
Well, I would only go back to that first soul that I did all those years ago when I couldn't push the students out of the classroom. There's a kind of motivation that comes with this type of process when they're doing everything by themselves. They're experiencing communities of practice, and they're experiencing student-centered learning, and they love it. That type of motivation has value on its own. Whether it's actually the self-organization or not, I cannot say for sure, but I believe it to be self-organization that is at work.
If I may, though, and I don't mean to be argumentative or anything, but when you watch them becoming enthusiastic about the research that they were doing to answer the question that you gave them, I can certainly understand that they would go, oh my God, I didn't even know that series existed, or whatever the topic was that you gave them. But wouldn't you say that that's their enthusiasm for learning the topic as opposed to learning the English for the topic?
Couldn't say. I think it all sort of blends together.
Okay.
The enthusiasm for learning the topic later translates to the enthusiasm for wanting to tell people about it. So you wouldn't believe what I just found out about series. You don't know what series is, do you? I know what series is, and I'm dying to tell you about it. That kind of feeling is what drives the success of English presentation lessons through souls.
Okay, got a few more questions, and we're getting a very healthy chat here at the Zoom room. Rhea asks, what's the differentiation between a soul, TBL, and PBL? And a backup question or a supplementary question to that is, if anyone was going to do research on souls, what would be good keywords to plug into a digital search form to learn more about souls?
Well, all the research there. I mean, I do my research with keyword on Google Scholar. My keyword Sugata Mitra. That's it. If he is cited, then the article is going to be about souls, or it's going to touch on souls in some form or other. So yeah, I would suggest you use Google Scholar and Sugata Mitra, and if you want to search the non-Google Scholar internet, go for souls, SOLE.
That's a pretty phonetic spelling of Sugata Mitra, right? SUGATAMI.
That's correct.
GRA. Okay, good. Couple more comments, this time from Bronwyn Davis. I understand the Indian experiment had student participants with very low levels of English. What is the lowest level you have had success with?
the lowest level I have had success with. Probably really low-level junior high school students. And they had fun with it. They were, actually, let me share screens again. I just quickly show you a few pictures of my classes, if I can. Can you all see my screen?
Looking good, Mike.
Okay. So this is one of my university presentation classes. Actually, this is from 2015. So this is that first year that I did it. This one wasn't about series. Oh yeah, why are tennis rackets shaped that way? They went and gave me a presentation about why tennis rackets have that shape. That was a good presentation too. This is some high schoolers at my own English school. The foreign guy at the background, he's Wayne Cuthbert. He was the head English teacher at Nanzan International School, and he was working with me at the time on souls and a couple of parents. And these are high schoolers. And I was also doing junior high school and sometimes elementary school souls in my own school at that time. And I also have done, online classes. When I started doing online classes, I have a couple partners, and my partners are focusing more on the younger learners, and I'm focusing more on high schoolers and college students doing online souls, multinational souls. So those are the contexts in which I do souls. And once again, the youngest that I've personally had success with would be the junior high students. But my partners have had success with elementary school students who can barely say their ABCs.
There are a bunch of questions that are still outstanding on the Zoom chat, especially. And I would like to just ask a couple of questions that I've set with Mike before I open up the microphones and let you guys have at it with him. I'll just say it out loud. What is a big question? So you're talking about formulating the questions that you pass out to the students as you give them their tasks to do for that class. So what is a big question, Mike?
Yeah, a big question is a difficult question that is generally open-ended. The definition of a big question itself is a big question. I mean, I'd encourage you all to go on the internet and Google big question, because there are all kinds of websites that have their own ideas about what a big question is. Some are religious and some are scientific and some are philosophical. For me, it's a big question that students want to try and answer, but they know that they can't in a limited time. But they strive to answer it.
Assessment. How do you grade? I assume that it's a presentation. Yeah. Do you do a presentation per class? Or how do you handle your assessment and things like that? The normal sort of not meat and potatoes, actually just the paperwork of teaching.
The assessment, as I said, the soul is it's the stuff underneath the presentation lesson. You can't really grade a soul because, well, it's entirely student-centered. The teacher can observe, but you can't really grade what's going on inside a student's brain or his heart. So I grade the English presentations. And my rubric is not a particularly original one. Probably if you've done English presentations, you very likely have a similar rubric. I would say that for my soul classes, I work on the rubric right from week 1 with the students. They have as much input in the rubric as I do.
Have you ever had any pushback from either teachers or administration going, Mr. Lyons, we've heard that you basically do nothing in class with the students, and they push back, or teachers will come back and say, hey man, come on, earn a living, would you? Or anything like that?
Nope, no pushback from anyone at all.
Parents, students dissatisfied saying, hey, I'm not learning anything for Gifu-ken or anything?
Yeah, no. I know that if I had a class of students that particularly asked me to teach them test English, I would probably refuse to do it anyway because I'm not that kind of teacher. But if I had been employed for that purpose, I would do my job. As it is, I am teaching English presentation classes in my university Seoul's, and the English presentation classes are just as successful as English teachers who go out right from the beginning with the intent of teaching English presentation and only English presentation. I know my classes are that good.
I just wanted to, before I open up the mics for everyone to be able to speak to you directly, you made a really interesting point, one that I had never thought of in all the time that I have been talking to you and invited you onto the show, and one that was compounded by a comment made by Rhea about this is how teachers learned how to use Zoom. And you actually made a bigger sort of a comparison, Mike, just before the camera started rolling in the room. This is how OTJ went.
Yeah, before everyone came in, Jose and I were talking about a blog post that I wrote at the beginning of the pandemic. And at the time, this is like April of 2020, and everyone was floundering. Everyone was in a big panic. What are we going to do? I don't know how to use Zoom. I don't know what to do with all these learning management systems. And our universities and our schools were not helping us. They were just saying, here's the software that you're going to use, learn how to use it. And people did their best, but mostly we asked each other for help. And in asking each other for help, we formed little communities of practice. And those little communities of practice communicated with other little communities of practice. And those connected with others. So in Japan, there was like one larger community of practice helping each other. And in all the countries in the world, we had one massive community of practice. It was connectivism in operation. It was connectivism in action. It was beautiful. So the 2020 school year was saved by a massive self-organized learning environment.
I would invite whomever wishes to ask a question to Mike to use the raise hand button so I know who's going to go first and who's going to go next. It's a bunch of questions that I purposely did not touch so that then we could actually get the creators of the question to speak to you directly, Mike. So if people will raise their hands, otherwise I'm going to be the teacher and I will not allow this to be self-organized. I will organize you. And because no one's raising their hands and I don't know why. Now, suddenly people just started climbing up and are not asking questions. So let's see. Emil, why not ask your question about the...
Well, you have a mic problem, Emil?
You're muted, sir. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait. Because the bonehead that I am, I forgot to make that available. Emil, unmute yourself, please.
Okay, so no one asked questions because you purposely decided not to ask our questions.
Yes.
So we all feel self-conscious about it now.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, I'm dealing with a bunch of self-conscious teachers. All right. Cool.
I mean, so Rhea asked a really interesting question, which is this electronic Montessori? Right? And I wonder, is this electronic Montessori? Or, I mean, because I don't teach Montessori, and I know why it's good for young learners, but why is it good for older learners?
Honestly, I don't know enough about Montessori to answer you.
I don't know much about Montessori either, but I do know by its reputation that there is a lot of freedom for the individual student to pursue whatever research they want to pursue. And the teacher guides them and tells them, well, you might want to think about this too. So it's a little bit more one-to-one, a little less group, unless that's the way the teacher wants to organize this particular class, but there's a lot of freedom. Whereas I don't know if I'm taking the words out of Mike's mouth or assuming anything, there's a lot more group work involved in a soul, yeah?
Yeah, so again, it's connectivism in action. Souls have to be group. Yeah, you can't do an individual soul. You can't really, I mean, you could do a two-person soul, but it's not very effective. 3 and up is what you need.
Can I pursue that though before I go on to Glenn's question? Why isn't it effective in pairs? Why does it have to be a group?
Because, well, pair work is, look, it's not like nothing, but pair work is so limited. It's not too bad though. I mean, 2 people talking to each other can learn a lot. My best friend and I, when we were growing up, I think I learned much, much more from chatting with him than I learned from, listening to lectures in school. But yeah, 3 people and up is much more effective.
I find though, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but when you put anybody in any situation, whether it be second language or first language, that a bilateral situation in terms of communication is so much easier in terms of the pacing and knowing when it's your turn and stuff. But once you move that into any kind of trilateral, multilateral situations, when you're in a group, that especially at the beginning, the students have a much harder time of knowing when it is okay for them to actually say what they're thinking. You get any of that experience at all?
Oh, I'm sure it's there. So group dynamics are, well, very subtle, right? And every 3 or 4 person group of kids is completely different. So they all self-organize as they see fit. There might be a shy kid who doesn't want to talk much, who doesn't want to take the lead, and there might be a leader who wants to do all the talking. But you let the kids do what they want, and then, well, that's student-centered. They're doing things their own way. That's really motivational.
Okay. Glenn, why don't you go ahead?
Before I ask my question, I'll just respond by saying when I do extensive reading, following the silent reading period, I put them in groups to talk about their books. I got a lot more activity putting them in groups of 3 and 4 than in pairs. Not only is there just more that they have to talk about, but everything Mike just said rings true. Okay, so my question from Mike is, I don't know how your classes have evolved over the years, but I just imagine if you have a research topic they need to check on in every single lesson, it might get tedious for them. They have to find this in every class and then present on it in the class. Did you find that to be so? Or if not, how did you conduct such a lesson? Such a course, I should say.
So right now I'm teaching 2 university courses, and as you know, they're generally one 90-minute period per week for 30 weeks over the year. Right now we're just about halfway through this year. I'll go back to last year's course, which is all online for me. And there were 6 students in that course. 6? I think there were 6 students in that course, and they didn't get bored at all, not at all. So 30, over the course of a year, 30 90-minute sessions. Yeah, they loved each and every one of them. Nobody skipped class because they didn't like it. A couple of times they were sick or something, but I had very good attendance, close to 100% attendance.
Bronwyn, you have your camera off, but would you like to ask your question with just your mic then? Or maybe she had to go take care.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
I'm back. Luckily, I can hear you. So I was a student in a self-directed learning environment. I was in that for a year, and I was probably too young to be really very conscious of it. But I do know that it made me really anxious.
Ooh.
And I don't know if there was a system in place to support students through that. And it's important to point out that the experiment was not extended beyond the year. What sort of support can be provided to prevent that?
So you mean to prevent anxiety in the students? I haven't had any That's not fair. I mean, if my students have felt anxious, I haven't really noticed it, except, you know, I know that some students feel anxious because there's an English presentation at the end. They don't feel anxious about the soul, but they might feel anxious about having to do an English presentation lesson. Well, I'm there to support them. I guess the answer is they have to do it. I mean, they're in an English class and it's an elective. I'm sorry, the soul courses that I'm doing right now are electives. And also in the compulsory classes, like the English 1 class, if I choose to do a soul in that class and they feel anxious, well, they probably feel anxious if I don't do a soul also. What do? I do my best as a teacher. It depends on the class size. I give them support, you know, I give them positive reinforcement as much as possible. When you were a student, what helped you?
Could you say that again?
When you were a student, what helped you to feel less anxious?
When the experiment ended?
Oh, that's all.
The chime.
No, it went for a year.
Yeah. And
it went for a year.
No, I was kidding. I meant like the chime at the end of the day, so you
get
the sigh of relief.
Oh.
It was so bad that my parents considered moving me out of that school.
Did you experience anxiety in other classes though?
No.
So with lecture classes?
No, I was a child.
Of what age?
I would have been 9.
So what were the activities that you were doing that made you so anxious?
Well, what made me anxious is that I was never sure if I was doing the right thing at the right time, because it was all direct by us, and we were supposed to be working individually, and so some people became very competitive, and that made me anxious. And I was worried about falling behind. I was worried that I wasn't learning much. So it was 3 hours of every school day, every morning. And it did not include any presentations.
How did the teacher assess you?
We had to hand in work. And the teacher assessed whether that was right or wrong. But there was some student assessment. There was some students marking other students' work. Just like if you finish a quiz and you hand the quiz to the person on your right, that kind of thing. I mean, I love the Indian experiment. I love the idea of the presentations experiments. I do teach a similar presentations thing for business students. Maybe not as well as Mike. But yeah, it was the 70s. It was the 70s. And I understand the whole point of an experiment is that it has the possibility of failing. Are the students and the people who are paying for their studies, are they prepared for failure?
I haven't had any failures.
Okay, that's great.
No, there might be some failures at Paradise School Goa, but I haven't heard of that. As I said, my university classes are they're English presentation classes on the surface, and the soul underneath it is working really well to support the English presentation classes. The students are buoyed by whatever is happening in the soul. They're buoyed by that to be really motivated for the presentations. And so they're just generally doing really well. I don't have any experience with students that simply don't want to do it, but I could imagine that students that don't want to do it probably wouldn't be in my class anyway.
Okay, so it's a fairly limited, it's limited by that.
Yeah.
Who can, the students who want to join.
So I could imagine that if souls were sort of made compulsory, as I think they are at Paradise School Goa in India, there might be some kids that are really unhappy with it, or there might be some parents that are really unhappy with it. I haven't heard that, but I can imagine it to be true.
I want to move on to Rhea's question, but I would think, just as I'm going to make a final comment on this, there is going to be anxiety among students for just about any teaching method. There's going to be dissatisfaction by students and parents and administrators with just about any teaching method. So it's just something that you deal with as an instructor or as a student or as a parent. Rhea, what did you want to ask?
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Right. Well, it's kind of a segue into that question as well. I find that the SOUL method has a lot of similarities to other student-centered methods like flipping your classroom, Montessori, task-based, project-based learning. So my first question is related to that, but when there is a student who has more anxiety, I wanted to just make a little comment about that, because I started to flip my classroom, and I'm not saying it's the same as SOUL, but there are some similarities, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And one of the difficult things is getting permission from administration, because you set it up differently as a class with different learning expectations. And now I'm in a new job where I want to start doing it again, and I have to like prove that it works before I can make it. So I'm really interested in this talk. But when I had been working at my old school, my previous school, my director was open to the idea, and he said, let's run a pilot class. If it goes okay, you can do some more classes next semester. And then eventually it became kind of a program. And it was just flipping a classroom for speaking skills, right? And so there's a lot of just letting students do what they are supposed to do, like giving them discussion questions, and then they go off and they'll do it in pairs, and then they do it in larger groups, and so on and so forth. But he said, in order to let us get this facilitated as a program at the university, we should put it under the microscope of a researcher in the flipped learning environment. And I said, okay. So there was an observer who came to the class and took some data and took some information. And the most surprising finding that she had was that teacher presence was much higher, because a lot, you know, at the beginning you said, oh, or someone asked a question like, do people criticize you for just sitting around while the students are doing all the work? Like, I sort of thought, is that going to happen? Like, but students find that they get more connection and more attention from the teacher, because when you're not just on the podium lecturing, you're able to get a little bit more intimate contact with students more frequently, or you can rearrange, oh, this student's really having a hard time. Like maybe I can put them in a pair with this student, and then eventually put them in a group of 3. And it just gives you more freedom to put your attention that way. And I find like teaching in a similar method as I go on, that I am able to reach the quieter students a little bit better and like give them baby steps to being more outgoing.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And Glenn made a comment, and Bronwyn's previous comment, it all sort of works together. Glenn made a comment in the chat about the granny cloud. Glenn, you know, the granny cloud ended about a month ago after 20 years or so. The granny cloud. Sugata Mitra's idea about grannies was that the teacher is in the background and the students are all self-organizing, and there should be an adult around, not to teach, but to positively reinforce. The grannies are the people that go around saying, hey, what's that you just wrote? How do you know that? How did you find that out? That's amazing. That's what the granny does, and gives a kind of emotional support, intellectual support, a little bit of intellectual feedback, so to speak, and gives the students a little bit of I know, a boost. It helps with anxiety, I think, and helps students feel positive about what they're doing. So yes, you're absolutely right. As I have a whole lot of time during the lesson, I'm not teaching, but I am going around saying, what's that you just wrote? How on earth did you find that out? I had no idea. And students really like that. Yay, I was able to teach Mike Lyons something that he had no idea about. And by the way, that happens pretty much every class. I always learn something new. And that's a real boon, both for me and for the students.
Before I go on to Emil's question, I noticed that there was a question in the Facebook thread from Namiko. So I'm going to throw that at Mike first. Mike, is it safe to say that the process is most important for soul? Says or asks Namiko, the process. That is it the process that does this, or it's not actually the achievement of getting a lot of information? It's the fact that the kids are digging around for themselves.
Yeah, I think it's the connectivism. It's a self-organizing phenomenon. Whenever you see self-organizing phenomena in nature, it's amazing to witness. For example, one example is you pull a plug in the bathtub and the water becomes a beautiful spiral. That's a self-organizing phenomenon, and it's beautiful. Or birds fly together in a well-organized flock. It's just beautiful. Students learn something on their own without instruction. They just process information that's out there on their own. And that's a beautiful phenomenon. They know it, they appreciate it.
Emil, go ahead.
I hate to jump ahead to something you may be talking about later, but as Dea says, I mean, students really do like to discover things on their own. It is an important part of the learning process, and it also gives you a chance to sort of identify students who may be having trouble, whereas you can leave students who are having successes by themselves. You give your energies to the students who need it. However, an incredibly important part of every one of my lessons is the assessment part. And so far, you haven't really talked about how you assess the successes or the failures of this class. And I'm kind of worried now that I'm not sure. I know I'm facilitating and getting them to use this information, but students themselves really do enjoy being graded. And yes, I've asked that question before, and Bronwyn Davis actually mentioned that there are student assessments. How do you actually assess a class to find the successes, the failures, or what you need to change?
I mentioned earlier, I do not assess the soul part. I assess the English presentation part. So I'm grading them with a rubric that we made together. Again, the first or second class of my program, I talked to the students and asked them, what do you want to improve in your English? We're going to do English presentations. What do you think you need to improve on to be better at English? And they give me some points. I also have my own ideas about what I want them to improve. I put everything together and make a rubric. And I grade the students on that rubric. So yes, does that answer you?
So what you're saying here is that before the class starts, you check their goals and then you assess whether they are meeting their goals or not.
Well, yeah, at the beginning of the program, I asked them, what do you want to improve on? For example, do you think your presentation needs to get, your pronunciation needs to improve? Do you think your grammar needs to improve? What's really important for you? And if the students say, I don't care about grammar. I really want to improve my pronunciation. Then I go, fine. I'm going to make pronunciation a big part of our rubric. And then when they're doing their presentations, I'm listening to their pronunciation and grading them more on their pronunciation than on their grammar, because that's what they wanted. But I have my own ideas too, and my own ideas also enter into the rubric. But anyway, the rubric is public for them. They can read the rubric. I always remind them of the rubric before the presentations. They know what their goals are when they go into the presentation. But once again, I'm not grading the soul, I'm grading the presentation.
That is really cool. That's the ultimate student-centered. They develop their own goals and then you grade them on it. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like that idea. Glenn.
Yeah, back to me again. Back when I was in high school, one of my teachers twice gave us sort of a student-centered project. One was to solve a murder mystery where every student had a clue. Some were red herrings. And the other was we got a survival list of how to survive on the moon after a crash landing. And the entire class had to work together to get this. Now, there were only limited solutions to these things, and it's not making a presentation per se. But that was my first experience with something similar to this. In a related point here, I put in the chat, how do you come up with these questions? You mentioned the big questions. I put something in the Zoom chat. Mentalfloss.com has some good examples. But where do you go to get the questions for your classes?
At first, when I first did souls, and I wanted to, I did the very first one about the white spots on series or the shape of tennis rackets. At first, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was a newbie. So I went on to a couple of websites run by other soul teachers in the UK, the USA, and they had databases of big questions. And I looked through those and found some that I wanted to go with. As it went on, I started developing my own. You kind of get used to it. You get good at it. No. Oh, sorry. May I just go on? If any of you guys have suggestions for big questions, I'd love to hear them. One of the most successful big questions that I've ever used came when I asked Mark Helgeson for his advice. His question was, what is happiness? And just a wonderful question. And I've thrown that out to my students on several occasions and gotten wonderful, wonderful responses. Yeah, it's always really useful to get different big questions from people in different disciplines. I have a good friend who's an Aikido black belt, and I asked him yesterday for Aikido related big questions. He said, what was the role of Aikido in World War II? Wow, I wouldn't know anything about that, but the question itself is so fascinating. Yeah, I want to go with it. So if any of you have big questions, let me hear them, please.
Think about it, but I don't want to be too distracted from the job at hand right now. Emil.
This is actually about big questions as well. So you talk about big questions, and I do know that there are some rules regarding big questions. However, what's the difference between a big question and a controversial question?
Well, some big questions can be really controversial. Here's a big question. Why not? Why not? Okay, why not legalize marijuana? That would be really controversial, and I'd get into a whole lot of trouble if I put that out there. I haven't put that one out there, not yet. One of these days, maybe.
Is that a big, is that a controversial question or a big question? I mean, why not legalize marijuana means that the students have to start looking at reasons for why marijuana is bad. But for example, here, I just read in the newspaper that the United States has abolished abortion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that a big question or is that a controversial question? Is that something we want to touch in a classroom?
I think that one's fine. I think the marijuana question is here in Japan. That's the marijuana thing would land me in a lot more trouble if the students were to go home and say, today we talked about marijuana. Mom, did you know that marijuana is actually really healthy? Mom would go, yeah, where did you hear that? And she'd be phoning the university and I'd be in a whole lot of trouble. So I avoid questions about marijuana, at least for now. But abortion, Japanese people don't particularly worry about abortion on the same level as Americans do.
So what you're saying here is that a big question is a question that gets the student to think, but a controversial question might get me fired.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Emil. You defined it so well.
Just on the cannabis question, I read in the news this morning that Germany is moving to fully legalize cannabis in Germany, which would make it the the country with the largest population that has actually moved to legalize cannabis use for recreational purposes. Be really interesting, right? Japan's starting to become a smaller and smaller sort of niche in terms of the utter fear that it has for cannabis. I wanted to ask as one of the last few questions that we might have before we thank you and you have to go. Thank you for your time this afternoon. If you were to if I asked you to oversee my project into starting to do souls on a limited basis or whatever basis, what would you give me as a list of, okay, you got to have this, make sure about this, got to get this done, make sure you have this ready, watch out for this. Do you have like a quick sort of 5-point or 10-point list? I don't know what is a 3-point list of like, watch out for this, get this done, prepare this kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. Figure out for yourself what a big question is. Look at some lists of big questions on the internet from various websites and find one which you believe will inspire and really interest your students and be too difficult for them to solve in any limited amount of time. That's the first thing. Second thing, commit yourself to a student-centered classroom. Commit yourself to being entirely student-centered. Sugata Mitra calls it minimally invasive education, drawing on minimally invasive medicine. The idea that a doctor should do as little as possible harm in order to help their patients. So be minimally invasive, commit yourself to that. And that's the hardest part for most teachers. When you look around and you see your student looking a little bit bemused or confused, help, but without helping. Encourage, but don't teach. You know, that type of thing. And the third thing, make sure that, I had a third thing. What was the third thing? Yeah, make sure that your rubric is in line with what the students want.
What if there's bemusement or confusion by some students who, by the way, these groups are created randomly, or they organize themselves, say, hey, how about you and me and him get together on this computer and answer the question? Yeah,
both those formats are possible.
Okay.
Sugata Mitra prefers the latter, when students choose their own groups, and he advises that students be allowed to change groups at random as they will, as they like.
What if you're seeing students who are bemused not by the question, but by actually using the computer? Do you still even then say, So what's wrong? Well, I don't really know how to use this keyboard. I've never typed on a keyboard before, only on a mobile phone. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out, would be your answer.
I prefer, no, I mean, yes and no. I prefer students to find out from their peers. But if a student really doesn't know what a mouse is, then I could say it works like this, and I could show them briefly. I've had that happen in the past. Of course, it doesn't happen very much anymore. I mostly teach high schoolers and university students. But I told you at the beginning of this session today that Sugata Mitra did a session with preschoolers in the United States, and somehow connectivism still happens there too.
Just a quick one, Emil, before we get to your question, from Teresa Cannonberg in the Facebook comment thread.
Hi, Teresa.
Does the whole class do the same question?
Sometimes yes, usually yes. On occasion, I've given them a choice of questions to use.
And is there any kind of competition set up between them, like which group gets to that answer first or something, or you try to make it as cooperative, or you just say, well, whatever, you can go ahead?
No, there's no competition. The only competition they have is, well, there is no competition at all. Their challenge is to do an English presentation. The soul part is entirely their own. So I don't influence one way or another. There's no A or A against B. I don't set things up at all. They do that.
So if they ended up with the same images on separate slideshows, because they're all answering.
Group A and Group B have exactly the same images.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Emil.
Just a couple of things. I don't want to kind of like chase this point, but I do want to clarify something. You mentioned on a couple of occasions that the question should be more difficult to answer in the time they've been given. Why is that so important that you've mentioned it so many times?
It's not a big question if you can answer it quickly. It's just a question.
But they can still do a presentation even if they can answer it quickly. But you've made a point to say that it should be something that they can't handle in that allotted time.
Well, yeah. There's just why can't you do a small question? I don't know.
The reason I ask is because if you give them one question and two groups end up with the same slide, they're still going to have a different perspective on that slide. Right. But you do seem to make it a point to say, hey, this should be bigger than their time allotted. Is that I mean, you've put your foot on that point. So I kind of want to know why.
Well, big questions are big for the students as well. If a student answers a really big question, then it's motivational. That's the only answer I can give you, because I haven't thought about it before. Souls were, when I first heard about souls, it was always a big question. I never even thought about doing a small question. But if you consider the smallest question, something like what's 2 + 2, give me a presentation. What do they have to work with? So you give them a big question and they have a lot to work with.
I know that's a great, that's an interesting example. However, I have never been disappointed by how creative my learners are. If I give them a small question, they will make it huge. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is that they're going to use the language to do what they need to do. So I'm not certain that it's necessary to give them a big question as much as it is to just give them a task, which begs the question, what's the difference between this and task-based learning?
The self-organization is the difference between this and task-based learning. They're the same thing, but self-organized learning means the teacher's hands off. Okay, it's minimally invasive. So that's the only difference. Now, why the big question? You're saying that small questions will work in task-based learning, right?
I'm saying that any question will give students the chance to produce information, and they will produce information to the extent that you let them. Sometimes they will be successful, sometimes they will fail, but it doesn't matter because they're producing.
Yeah, I suppose we could come up with the question, what is 2 + 2? Do a presentation, and students might answer 4, and that's it. But other group of students might take it and run with it and start talking about the cognitive processes and maybe numerology and all kinds of cool things. It might happen. But you know, in that case, in the case when they turn a simple question into a big question, into a bigger question, that's self-organized learning there, and that's what that is.
Yeah, isn't it freaking exciting?
Yeah. So I guess you're quite right. I guess they don't need to be big questions. You can have a small question and allow students to turn it into a big question on their own.
So the second question that I really had was, again, I'm chasing the point of assessment. And I really do think that an important part of any learning situation is assessment. And I want to know, yes, I know you do use the rubric and you make it super student-centered by making their rubric their self-assessment. But what if the students themselves get to assess each other? Is that a bad thing?
No, it's not a bad thing, but there are limitations in an English classroom with second language learners. How are they going to assess each other on pronunciation? I mean, they can try, and I think it's a really good exercise to try. However, I'm an expert and they're not. I'm a native speaker and they're not. So I think I have a lot more experience in judging their English pronunciation. On the other hand, I do always push them to practice. Without me there, practice on your own and help each other. And so self-organization does come into the practice sessions, and they do, to a degree, self-assess or assess each other. The slides, for example, I've told my students basically every single class, you're doing this as a group presentation. If there's any English mistake on your slides, you're all responsible. This is a group grade, So if your slides are wrong, all of you are getting depointed from that. And so you check each other's slides. There you have some group assessment. They're all working on looking at each other's slides, looking for English mistakes. So yeah, there is that in self-organized learning, if you set it up correctly.
Okay, Rhea?
Quick one, sorry. Yes, I was just wondering, I hadn't really thought about the logistics until the mention of, oh, what if a student doesn't know how to use a mouse? So this is a physical classroom with a number of computers, not just letting them use their phone, because that could make things a little different. So that's one question. Is there a computer in the class? How many computers? And how many students in a class in this environment?
Geez, I've done all of them. I mean, I've done them with phones. I think my biggest soul was something like 150 students, with the location being Mexico, Japan, California, Argentina. That's maybe the biggest one that I can remember.
Oh, wow, that's a lot. Like, what I understand about Seoul is the beauty of it is it does reduce barriers for students who don't have access to the best technology, right?
Yeah.
So would you say that you're able to create a learning environment with a larger group of students than would normally happen, and also without perfect technology with Seoul? That might be one differentiation between that and basic task-based, project-based learning most of the time?
You can do task-based project learning online as well with students in Argentina and Mexico. You can do that too, can't you?
I don't know.
Um,
But yeah, so maybe you can access larger groups of students because the learning is happening in the group. Would you say that that's true or not so true?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Well, I've never taught more than 30 students in a class. So you have a class of 150 students, is that right? And
that one with Mexico is a one-off. That was kind of cool. That was awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, that was my last question, and just really enjoyed your talk as well. I wanted to mention that.
I think a lot of people enjoyed
Sorry,
it.
I don't think I really answered you though. Anyway, the logistics, the souls will work in a whole variety of situations. And self-organized learning depends on connectivism. It depends on students being able to connect with each other. So if they are face-to-face, they can connect. If they're using their phones, it's not as good, but they can connect. If they're using big screen computers, it's a little better than phones, they can still connect. I've done all of them, and they all work to a degree. When you have students in places with poor connections, it really is a downer. Because if you have a group of students, maybe 5 or 6 students in a group, and one student has terrible audio and feedback and stuff, then the other students are just like, ugh. So audio, especially with the online ones, audio is a big deal.
Very big deal. It's always a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a favor. I have a question from Teresa, and I'm going to ask it to you, Mike. And then once you've answered that, Glenn, you're free to go with your question. And in the meantime, I'm going to go to the bathroom, so my camera will be off. So here's the question for you, Mike.
Yeah.
Teresa asks, to pass the class, what is the minimum number of presentations? What is the minimum number of presentations they must have under their names in your assessment book in one semester? So you
3.
can answer that, and then Glenn will go with his.
It's 3, Teresa. In my 15-week semester, the last 5 weeks, in the final 5 weeks, there are 4 test souls. In the first 10 weeks, it's all practice and preparation. In the final 5 weeks, there are test souls when I'm actually grading them. Before that, I am grading them, but it's not recorded grades. It's feedback grades. But in the final 5 weeks, 4 souls, and they're graded. And if they miss one, that's okay. I'm grading the top 3. I'm giving them the best 3 grades from the final 4 souls. And go for it, Glenn.
I think that's great to sort of scaffold them all through the semester, and then at the end, you even allow one to miss. That's a great way of doing it. It relieves some of their pressure, especially from the first 1 or 2 that they've had to make. My question should be a pretty quick answer too, and that is, how do you deal with kids that actually don't participate in a group, whether it's 3 in a group or more?
Well, it's really...
They just simply don't take part for whatever reason. I've taught in high school, and that has come up.
Yeah, I've been doing souls for all this time now, I guess about 6 years. And during that time, hundreds of souls. And I can only remember one student on one occasion, only that didn't participate. She was forced to come here to this room where I am right now by her mom when I was doing a junior high school soul with her little sister. Her mom told her, the big sister, to come too and give it a try. She really didn't want to. So she was pouting and she didn't participate.
Well, I run into cases at the university more and more in the last 10 years where you have the socially challenged or emotionally challenged students that are clinically depressed students. So it's very difficult for them sometimes to work even in a pair, let alone a group. Any tips on something like that?
I have a clinically depressed student right now. I mean, he's actually getting treatment, and he was in my soul class yesterday. Oh, he loves it. He loves it. This is the best class of his, week. Because, well,
what do you think is the reason for that? What do you think? How have you overcome that?
No one telling him what to do. He does what he wants. He's interacting with peers, the other students. No teacher's telling him what to do. There's a teacher there facilitating and advising him on his English and letting him learn English in his own way, at his own pace, and he loves it. Yeah, but I told you about the one student all those years ago. So she didn't want to take part. She was in a huff because her mom made her do something she didn't want to do. Other than that, I've never had anything. And that's hundreds of sessions.
Okay, Emil. I'll bring your hand down for you.
Just to tackle Glenn's final question, and this is principally anecdotal over years of experience. If you have clinical or emotionally challenged students, peer work is not very good for them. Being in groups of 3 or more is far better for clinically or emotionally depressed students. Pair work puts too much pressure on them. And of course, we all know that being alone puts them in distress. So as Mike has already said, he's not recommending pair work for this. He's recommended groups of 3 or more. So yeah, this is perfect.
I want to go back to that class yesterday with the clinically depressed student. There are 6 in that class. Man, I love that class. Well, the clinically depressed kid, he's quite active and chatty. And there's this girl over on that side who's also really chatty. And this girl is all academic, and another girl is very keen on writing down everything she says. Look, they all participate in their own way, at their own speed. And that's self-organization. I'm not telling them how to participate or what to do. I walk around and I say, look, can I help your English in any way? Wow, what's that you just wrote down? How did you find that out? And I just give them that positive feedback. And I'm a bit of a granny, as Sugata Mitra calls us. I'm a granny. I'm learning from them. I'm letting them be them. And it works emotionally.
Can I ask you something, Mike? I know that you have a forum for soul teachers like yourself. What's the membership like in that? How many teachers do you have in that soul forum?
The soul forum? You mean Soul Online, my website?
The group that you have of teachers that discuss souls amongst yourselves, because I sometimes see that kind of activity on Facebook. Is it a big group?
There's so many groups there's not one group, sorry. Okay. If you ask me how many soul teachers I'm personally in contact with around the world.
Maybe something like that.
I'm personally in contact with maybe 50 to 100 soul teachers around the world. But I know that the number of soul teachers around the world is somewhere in the region of 5,000 to 10,000.
The teachers that you do talk to, what do you guys talk about? When you're talking about souls, like, hey, have you heard about this? Oh, I've had this problem. Oh, but this is an ongoing issue. What do you guys talk about as soul experts?
What do we talk about? It's one of the questions that I think you asked earlier. What advice do you give to people that are doing souls for the first time? And soul food, soul music. Yeah, thanks, Glenn. What advice do we give to people who are doing it for the first time? What's an excellent big question? How do we get more involvement from experts around the world? I would love for experts let me take, for example, Adam Jenkins is an expert in Moodle. If Adam came up with some big question about learning management systems, because he knows more about it than anyone else that I personally know. If Adam Jenkins gave me a big question about the purpose or the meaning of learning management systems and recorded that as a video big question, that would be something I could show to my students and say, this person, Adam Jenkins, is an expert in this field. Listen to his big question. And my students would be so motivated to try to answer it. I've had Mark Helgeson's big question. I've had a few big questions come from Sugata Mitra. And yeah. Oh, and I also got a big question once asked by a child in Colombia. She went on video and speaking Spanish. This is like a 5-year-old girl. She said, do you know what the coffee production process is from the bean to the cup? I bet you don't know. Can you tell me? And that was her video. It was so cute. And when I showed it to my students smiled and then they jumped into that topic. They were so keen to answer it. It's so good when you get big questions from experts.
I don't know if you want this question. How do you know when you're fluent in a language?
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah,
Can you record that and send it to me?
Maybe I'll just do it right now. No, well, while I think about how I'm going to put that. Well, when you say record something, let's say Adam did want to do it. What do you want? A 2-minute sort of setup and then a shot at the question, or just me on video in 5 seconds asking the question?
Well, I would want Adam to send me an MP4 or a YouTube link of Adam asking the question with maybe a intro. Do you guys know what a learning management system is? Well, it's something like Moodle or Google Classroom. Something like that is a learning management system. You're all using them. What I want to know is, and then the big question.
Okay.
Something like that. So let's say 20, 30 seconds, big question. We in the Seoul community, we're talking for many years about making a database like that, but we all found it was too difficult to organize, so we never did.
The self-organized learning group could not organize to create questions for self-organized learning group.
No, it's just the video part of it and getting experts.
Oh, that's easy. I could come and talk to your group and tell them how to use YouTube.
So what generally happens is we all type into text databases. I personally have my own on Google, on a Excel file. I think I have about 400 big questions that I've come up with myself.
Speaking of questions, Ray is going to get the last one because we have asked you far more than we should have of your time today, Mike. So Ray, what's
yeah, I said the last one was my last one, so sorry about that. Something that wasn't clear to me initially that I learned through this talk that does make Seoul much different from other things is that you are connected to a community in live time. I think that I thought this was a technique that you learn from Sugata Mitra, but this is, like you said, we in the Seoul community. So my question is, like, how often do you communicate with the other instructors, and how do you communicate? Like, do you have a big messenger board, or how does that get facilitated? Yeah, and like, how often are you on there, like time-wise, in a week or a day?
Yeah, as I said, though I personally, boasting here, have tried many times to organize all of us into one central community of practice. And Sugata Mitra has also asked me to do this, but I've tried several times. It just doesn't work. The various soul teachers around the world, we all have different areas of interest and expertise. My very wonderful colleagues in Colombia are particularly interested in rural community souls. My friends in Italy are focusing on junior high school lessons. I'm interested in university and high school in a second language environment. We all have different interests, right? So it's very difficult to organize into one central group. So we're all on various different boards and we're all on various different Facebook pages. How often do I communicate with them? 2 or 3 times a week is the answer.
Mike, as a related point, one of the last things I like to ask of my guests is, where can we see you again? Are you doing any presentations? Are you publishing any papers or anything that we should?
At PanSig next weekend, I'm doing a presentation about, what is it? I think it's about the method of setting up a multinational online SOL.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people here will be wanting to
remember, I did that amazing one with Argentina and Japan and California and Mexico. That was wow. But now I do it quite regularly right now. So doing the online SOLs, and there are a lot of pitfalls, a lot of benefits too. So I'll be talking about that at PanSig. It's not online. I'm afraid if you want to see the presentation, you have to get yourself to Nagano.
That was going to be my next question. This has been a fantastic afternoon.
I'm in Nagano.
Oh,
great!
Come
great.
on.
Join
See you next week.
Get your tickets soon, I normally at this point talk about the next episode that we're going to have, and I normally show the graphic that we're going to be using for the event. However, I'm still in the middle of constructing it with Dr. Jim Ronald. Jim Ronald will be coming on board and talking about his work specifically with pragmatics. For those of you who don't know much about pragmatics, or you know that there's a pragmatic SIG, but you don't really know what it's all about, I think there's a really good opportunity to learn about it. Also, we're going to get to know a little bit about Jim. Jim's a great guy. And that, I believe, will be in the second. Okay, let me just double check. And you know what? I actually got completely confused this morning, and I thought this episode was at 10 in the morning, and I was all ready to go at like 9:40, and I was going, wait a minute, I'm still in another meeting. What am I going to do now? And then one of the other people in the meeting told me, no, Jose, your thing is at 1. And I go, oh yeah. And I went to go make another cup of coffee. In any case, once I talk to Jim, and once we do have that PR card, and when we don't have the PR card, I can't put up the event itself, but keep an eye out for the next episode of OTJtv. That will be with Dr. Jim Ronald in about a couple of weeks. Okay, now, while I'm going to say goodbye to Mike, thanks, Mike. Thanks a lot. Everybody wave. I would also like to invite any one of you who would like to stay to hear about an announcement I'm going to be making with a couple of friends of mine. One is Adam Jenkins, and the other one is Erin Noxon, who I hope will be coming in to talk to us. And there she is. There's Erin. But you guys are more than welcome to stay. But we're going to be talking about what we're going to be doing this summer. And the OTJ summer sessions, yeah, you could think of it that way. In any case, if you'd like to stay and listen to what we're going to say, we're going to be talking about something that we're putting together for September 4th. But thanks again to Mike. Thank you, sir. It was a great pleasure to have you to come on.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you, everyone.